Just a little bit.
The strategic answer. Okay. Do you see the 5 pillars as a spiritual practice? 5 pillars that you do right now. Yeah. Arms with their arms with the 5 pillars. Well, Christians do them as well, so that you go to pilgrimage, you give alms to the poor, you pray, you do Ramadan and fasting. Now these are all practices which are common in Christianity as well. And I think they're good practices in and of themselves. The trapping, intellectual trappings you put on it are one thing, but if you put them about the actual practice, which is being psychological, good for people, it's common to both practices. Is that reasonable?
I mean, I guess, but I don't think that there's anything like that doesn't hold any weight to, the virtue of Islam. You asked me
well, it certainly doesn't speak to its lack of the way. In fact, I'm a universalist, okay, so I see merit in all religions. I'm not here to take specifically the top of any.
Appreciate respect, like I said, man to man, nothing but love.
Just give me like 2 minutes.
I'm trying to find common ground as much as possible, because when you guys debate, you're usually going at each other's weak points, and I think there are weak aspects in both. Like if you go for Aisha with the Muslims, I think you've got an easy shot. When they go for the Trinity with respect, the Trinity confuses a lot of people, so a lot of debates tend to be that. Sometimes spent talking about the common denominators and the positives of both is time also well spent, I think. And it's quite a Christian thing to do.
I think that when it comes to truth, because I don't talk about Aisha a lot.
Good for you. Good for you. If you're not just taking that easy shot, good for you.
I like to go with the theology of Islam, and it's coherency.
Okay.
So that's why when you ask me what's the best thing that the Quran says, or the best thing about Islam, is that it points us back to the scriptures.
Which is a good tactical answer, but it also points you towards monotheism, yeah? Huh? So you're both monotheistic.
That means nothing, because you could be monotheistic and believe in the wrong God.
You could, but it's closer to, conceptually, it's closer to the truth of things, I suspect, than,
it's
say, polytheism or atheism.
Sure, but at the same time, because even the Bible talks about this, it says that even the demons believe in one God, and they tremble. So it's showing yes, there is one God, that's true, but if you don't have the truth, if you don't, submit and believe in the true God, follow the true God, then that means nothing.
So do you think a Muslim who lives a good life can
you got to define good. I don't think anybody who lives
somebody who in practice is living out Christian ethic, okay? If a Muslim is living out a Christian ethic, or an atheist, in practice, but they're not doing it using that intellectual framework, but they're doing it nonetheless, do you think that they can go to heaven then or not?
No, I think that if you're not living a good life, if you're rejecting the true God who gave you that life. So he's at the fundamental of that life. So if you're practicing Christian values as a non-Christian, the first thing you do is acknowledge God. That's the first thing to do. And so Islam, they're not acknowledging the true God. So that's why even if they're given to the poor, all these good virtuous things to do, they're denying God. And so that's the bottom line.
I know I find that belief troublesome, because it seems to imply that our intellect is more important than our ethical conduct. That no matter how I behave ethically, no matter how much virtue I bring to that and how much sincerity, if I don't compute the analytical stuff right, then I fall short. And it seems to me that's counter to the spirit of what's in both Christianity and Islam, which is the walk you walk is more important than the talk you talk. And I can always make intellectual mistakes. My intellect is not a moral faculty. It's a computational faculty. And do you really believe in a God who values computational power above ethical intent and behavior?
I think it is moral. It's moral to acknowledge the true God and not to attribute his identity to something else that he's not. That's the immoral thing. Like, God despises that. He despises false attribution and the worship of idols or false gods that we make on our own, or start worshiping other things than Him. That's a moral issue.
That makes him sound kind of egotistical, which is the antithesis of what I believe God is.
Well, for me, it's like if my wife starts going to one of these brothers and saying, "Thank you for providing for me," or "Thank you for putting a roof over my head," I will feel the most disrespected, and because I gave her a roof over her head. I take care of her. If she gives that credit to someone else, that's a righteous jealousy that I'm right to have.
I do see the logic of what you're saying. I just think you're conceptualizing the divine as something very literal and anthropomorphized with too many human faculties.
I would say that our human faculties come from Him. These aren't human faculties.
Yeah, but wouldn't you also agree that, like, did you see Jordan Peterson debating 20 atheists? Like,
yeah, he did terrible.
You think he did terrible?
Yeah, I think he did terrible.
I'm a fan of Jordan Peterson, okay? I like him.
Do you think he did good?
I think in that debate he didn't do good, but I'm still a fan because I think he's a man of good intent. And I think his psychology is good. And I think he talked about when Moses goes up Mount Sinai and he can only see God through a limited perspective, from a limited vantage. He's pitching the idea that God is intellectually unknowable, which I think is true. I think this is what the story of Moses says. It's what you get in Buddhism and so on. It's a mystical view that you can't rationally conceptualize God to the degree that you seem to be. You seem to think that it's got to be in the rational, analytical element.
Well, not to a full extent. I do believe that there is a level to where we can rationalize God to the point where that He's revealed. You know, He's given a general revelation.
Yeah, well, you get a general sense of the thing without nailing it down intellectually.
But then He also gives a special revelation where He reveals exactly who He is with no generalities but specifics.
When was that?
That's with the Scripture. That's through the prophets. So when we can only know God because if He reveals Himself. He's completely out.
Yeah, but in addressing the question, is the finite human intellect capable of grasping the infinite divine?
Not fully.
Okay, we agree on that, yeah? So that would imply that whatever faculty is drawing us towards God ultimately would have to be a higher faculty than an intellectual choice.
Of course.
In the hierarchy.
But that doesn't eliminate that there is some intellectual faculty.
No, it doesn't. So we agree. Okay, so there is an intellectual level, but in the hierarchy of things which are fundamental to your spiritual growth, the intellect isn't primary. Yeah, it would imply that.
Sure.
Okay, that would mean then that if I behave, so what would supersede intellect? I so apologize.
No, that was
I've been eating crisps. No, that was me.
That was you? Oh my God.
That actually was a crisp. I apologize. Anyway, so that's embarrassing. Cheers. So that would imply that in the hierarchy of things which draw us towards the divine, there is something higher than the intellect. Even though the intellect is important, there's something above it.
I agree.
I would pitch that ethical conduct is above intellect. Now, might you consider that possible?
Yeah, it's possible.
Okay.
I believe it's possible. And I think that, like, again, at the core of ethical conduct is the knowledge of God, or the acknowledgement of God. That's the base of our ethics and our morality.
Well, you mean the intellectual acknowledgement of God, but that's why I created a question where I split the two elements, where I went, if somebody behaved ethically, which has primacy over the intellect, but intellectually they were, in your terms, misguided, then how would God feel about them? So they're ticking the box for the primary spiritual faculty, which is ethical behavior, but they're falling short on the intellectual. Now, I would have thought God would favor them more than people who got the intellectual thing right, but got the ethical conduct wrong.
But you're splitting up acknowledgement of God from ethical virtues. That's one of the. You can't.
I'm saying it's possible to make an intellectual mistake and still behave ethically if you accept. Okay, great.
Yeah, but so you can make an intellectual mistake and still behave ethically. Like, I can make an intellectual mistake about God, right, while still acknowledging who God is.
Sure.
But let's say I don't understand who He is, or really the truth of everything, right, about Him. But I know who He is, and I perform ethically and virtues because of Him, because of my acknowledgement of Him. So my ethical values, whether I'm an atheist or a Christian, it comes from God. He's the source of it, whether I acknowledge Him or not.
We can never. That may be the case. I hope it's the case. I can't know. But
Spirit isn't ethics.
All I'm arguing is other people, because I'm a universalist, I have to bang the drum for the notion that people of other religions who are behaving ethically as well, even though intellectually they may have got it wrong. Let's assume you've got it right intellectually, they've got it wrong. Yeah? But nonetheless, I would hope that a benign, loving and just God would look upon them in a way where he wouldn't send them to hell.
Well,
can you understand how that creates a problem?
When you say non-intellectual, what do you mean? Do you mean that they deny God, but they...
I mean that they use whatever intellect they have, they draw the wrong conclusion. Hypothetically, let's assume they've just drawn the wrong conclusion because they didn't pick Christianity. But nonetheless, they behave in an ethical fashion, which, as Jordan Peterson would say, now I'll defend him in that debate, he's very consistent. He goes, a Christian is not what you intellectually believe, it's what you act out. He believes that, and I think he's on point on that. And hopefully you can see it's a possible way of looking at things. Yeah?
I think
it's not anti-Christian.
I don't think that it's either or. Like, I don't think that it's the intellect versus the morale or the ethics.
Well, the hierarchy, I'm not saying they're natural enemies. However, there can come points. If you want to test the thing axiomically, the integrity of the thing, there can come points when your intellect and your ethical behavior are in conflict. So I'm looking for that weak spot so we can clarify where we're at.
Your intellect goes against your...
Yeah, where your intellect ends up being in conflict with your ethical conduct. So when that happens, then how do you think God would adjudicate that?
Well, what's an example of that?
Well, in this instance, say somebody of another faith who doesn't intellectually embrace Christianity, but they're conducting their life in accordance with the Christian ethic. If they're living the ethic, but they don't intellectually embrace the dogma's not the right word. They don't embrace the creed.
That's what I'm saying. Acknowledging, like, for example, acknowledging Jesus as the Son of God and embracing the gift that he offers us, right? That is along with, that's ethical. To deny the gift that Christ offers.
It's one route, I'll buy that. It's one route to ethical behavior, is to go, I intellectually embrace the idea of Christ, therefore I'll behave ethically. But that doesn't mean it's the only possible route by which you might end up conducting ethical behavior, yeah? So I'm exploring how God will look upon the people who are conducting ethical behavior, but they didn't get there through that intellectual route.
If they don't accept who God is and the testimony that he gives through his Son, they are
going to go to hell.
Yeah, well, yes, but they're going against the foundation of the ethic itself. That's my point.
So you do think the intellectual component is more important than the ethical?
It's both. You're like
you think they happen to have both landed on exactly the same level in the hierarchy?
It's a knowledge of God, right? It's a knowledge of God and accepting God, accepting who he is and honoring him as he is.
With respect, and I'm not trying to. You did just say that you accepted there might be some conduct which is more important than intellectual. About 10 minutes ago, I think.
Yeah, but
and then I said, might you accept that in the hierarchy, ethical behavior might supersede intellectual behavior, even though they're both important? And you seem to be saying yes. And so that makes that divide between the two a legitimate object of discussion.
Is there a part where intellect and ethics land on the same place?
I can imagine there well is, but I don't think it means they've got total congruence. And when you want to explore the mechanics of the thing, it helps to separate them as much as you can. But I'm sure they have some congruence.
Yeah, so this is what I'm saying. I'm saying that ethics and knowledge or intellect are merged together or are in agreement when it comes to the acknowledgement of God. That's both ethical and of your knowledge of your intellect. Okay? They go together. Now
they can go together.
Yeah, in this category they go together.
If you're a Christian, you would argue they go together. I'm just saying, if you're a Muslim or you're a Buddhist or you're any of those other guys, some of them I think behave really well.
It doesn't matter. If God says they don't, if they're not, then it ain't the case.
Is there nothing in your gut that goes, maybe if God is just and merciful and loving, the notion that he would create these people knowing how they're going to behave in advance and pre-condemn them to hell.
He doesn't pre-condemn anyone.
Well, he knows how they're going to behave and the choices they're going to make.
Yeah, but that's not a pre-condemnation.
That feels in conflict with the idea of being just and merciful and loving. Now, I may be wrong, but you can see that is a sensible and quite human reaction to have to that idea.
I think that would be a straw man of what God is.
I mean, it mainly is an emotional argument, actually.
Yeah, because I'm not saying that we don't believe that God pre-condemns anyone. just because he knows how they're going to live their life and the decisions they're going to make at the end, and he knows the destination, it's not him pre-condemning you, but because of their actions, this is where they end up. Him knowing about it is not.
Well, as one of the atheists, I think, accurately put it to Jordan Peterson, at the point when... Sorry?
Did you hear Peterson's response?
I think we both agree Peterson made a number of mistakes.
I'm listening to this last statement and I got to get going.
Actually, listen, you've been very kind giving me any of your time at all. I haven't heard of you before, but you played really well.
Thank you. I appreciate it. What's your name?
Tony.
Avery.
No, that was a pleasure.
Yeah.
So it's GodLogic, yeah?
Avery.
Okay, Avery. Thank you very much.
Appreciate it.